Ladies and gentlemen,
Please welcome.
I like this kind of party, baby.
It's good to be the king.
All right, everybody. Mike Damergis along with the King, Scott Engel, with our new podcast, episode number 1. It's called The King and I. Scott, so excited to be part of this.
Yeah, glad to be back with you, Mike. For those of you who don't know, Mike was my original producer on Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio. He nicknamed me the King. And now here I am.
Don't blame this on me. Don't blame
you were the
this on
one.
me.
You were the one. And you come up with basically for anybody who's like, I would say under 60 years old, and based on the History of the World Mel Brooks movie, where he actually said it's good to be the king. That's how it started. But you can find me now on thegameday.com with my sports and betting advice, rotoballer.com for all my fantasy football rankings, and Seahawks.com with my weekly fantasy football advice from around the league. Mike, tell the listeners about yourself.
Well, I'm very short, and there's not a lot to tell about myself. I've been working in sports radio for 25 years. Started at the Fan up in Toronto. Actually, worked a little bit with ESPN Radio a little bit before that. Went to the Fan in New York, produced for New York Giants football. Sirius XM, Major League Baseball Network, worked under the great Buck Martinez as well, and then worked for Roto Experts with you for a while. And now I'm doing a podcast with you along with my duties at Iona University, where I am the graduate director for sports communication and media. Just did a great interview for the 45th anniversary of Bucky Dent and Mike Torres. And you can catch that online. Just go to my website, mad-sports.com. You can check that interview. Also follow me at Twitter at sportsradioprof. So there you go. That's the introductions.
Yeah. I don't think anybody under 70 who's listening to this podcast knows who Bucky Dent and Mike Torres is, but you could Google that.
Well, the legends in Boston, I'll tell you, that goes, if they know who Babe Ruth is and who Bucky Dent is and Mike Torres, or Bucky
kind of a difference, between Mike Torres and Babe Ruth, but we digress.
We digress. Well, let's start things off with your Seahawks. A tough loss last week. They couldn't get it done against the Bengals. A tough one for Geno Smith. I'm looking at this right. They're giving 7.5 points to the Cards. The over and unders 44.5.
Yeah, and just so everybody knows, what we'll be doing every week here is Mike will we'll focus on certain games. Mike, who's very experienced with NFL broadcasting, will talk about the game from some regular NFL and betting angles, and I'll weigh in on fantasy and betting as well, because I do both over at thegameday.com. The Seahawks are giving 7.5. I actually would take the Cardinals to cover, because divisional games in the NFC West are always tight. Divisional games are always tight, but I like Seattle. A tough loss last week, like you said, 4 shots at the end of the game from the 11-yard line, and they couldn't get in with the winning touchdown. So I think they want to jump out early. I like some props here for, the Seahawks to score first and win on the money line on DraftKings. I would definitely go with that. Another prop I like is Tyler Lockett over 56.5 receiving yards on DraftKings. And from fantasy perspectives, on rotoballer.com, I have Geno as a top 10 quarterback this week, Mike. He's been lingering outside the top 20 in points per game and total points fantasy-wise, but the Cardinals rank 28th in fantasy points per game allowed to opposing quarterbacks. We're going to have to watch Zach Charbonnet, the backup running back, to see if he's going to play. As we're recording this, he has not practiced with a hamstring injury. DK Metcalf is a must start. On the other side, only use Keontae Ingram in fantasy if you're desperate. I don't like Marquise Brown this week, not in my top 25 wide receivers in my player rankings on rotoballer.com, because that Seahawks secondary, they're healthy now. And now that they got everybody healthy, that's a terrific secondary. With at the corners, you got Trey Brown, Devin Witherspoon, Reek Woolen, Julian Love, Jamal Adams is actually available right now. And that's a very good looking secondary. So I'm fading most of the Cardinals this week.
I don't know if I'm so confident in Geno Smith. Only 5 touchdowns and 3 interceptions so far on the season. When you look at all the elite quarterbacks, like Brock Purdy's got 10 touchdowns, double the touchdowns of Geno Smith.
Well, when you're looking at the matchup from a fantasy perspective, though, Arizona's not too good against opposing fantasy quarterbacks. And this is a matchup to take advantage of. Geno is capable of a good game in week 2 against Detroit. He was one of the top fantasy quarterbacks of the week. I think Seattle wants to get their passing game on track, and this is a good matchup to do it. So also watch rookie Jackson Smith and Jigba, who's finally past that wrist injury. They're targeting him more often. And this is a good matchup, like I said. When you look at the fantasy points per game allowed to wide receivers. From a pure NFL perspective, Mike, how are you feeling about this game spread-wise?
Listen, Seattle at home, they're 3-2. They lost a tough one. I think if they want to be real contenders in the NFC West, they got to win this game. You're taking on the Cardinals, who are 1-5. They're bleeding. They're really playing for the number 1 pick in the college draft here. To me, you got to go with Seattle. All things considered, the Seahawks at home give the 7.5 points.
Here's one thing about what you said, though. It's like maybe the front office wants to tank, but I've watched the Cardinals. They've played hard. And you know this, Mike, because you've been around the NFL. If a front office wants to tank, the players and the coaches are always going to play hard for their jobs, their money, their future, etc. So it's not going to be an easy game, especially when it's an NFC West matchup.
No, I don't think the players want to tank, but they're getting to the point in the season where you're 1-5, or you lose 1 or 2 more games, and that's it. Just mentally, emotionally, players start getting in their mind, I'm not getting hurt. I got to think about what's going to happen to me next year, because in the NFL, it's not for long. It's not baseball where you can linger on a team and then just get injured and still get paid. It's not like that. So another loss or two, their season's really done, and then they'll tank mentally, even though they're not looking to tank just to get the number 1 pick, because they don't care about that. The front office cares about that. Let's move along.
Yeah, but one more thing, though, and you know me, I don't let things go, though.
No, of course not.
Those players are playing for jobs, they're playing for contracts, they're playing for money. I spoke to a pro sports financial guy about this, and he says, these guys can't afford to relax even if they have a losing record, because the game is too violent. If you check out mentally, you get a bigger chance of getting injured. Secondly, you're playing for your future.
All right, we'll see how it pans out. Let's move along to the Philadelphia, where the Eagles hosted Dolphins, a battle of titans. The Eagles, a shocking loss to the Jets last week. That's right, the New York Jets. A real ugly game for Hurts. Eagles are giving 2.5 over and under 52. Dolphins 5-1. I mean, two is unbelievable. I mean, the expletives to describe Tua this year, I never saw it coming.
Expletives?
He's been fantastic so far. 14 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. They're just putting points on the board. The lowest number of yards, he's 223 points, well ahead of other teams in the league, well ahead of. Just think of the number of points they're putting up, the number of yards they're putting up, and this guy's been sensational, and they're just firing on all cylinders, but they got a real challenge against Philadelphia.
Yeah, I didn't well, you're a Jet fan, so they're probably making you angry. So that's why you use expletives to describe this Dolphins offense. But you should be happy. The Jets won their Super Bowl last week. But let me know when the parade is. I'll join you. But this game, I'm definitely taking the over here, because the Dolphins, in 4 of their games, their opponents have combined for over 60 points. And even without that Denver route that they had, the historic route, they're still averaging 30.6 points per game. So, this is also going to be a fantasy gold mine. Tua is my number 1 ranked quarterback this week. Tyreek Hill with the most receiving yards of any player in NFL history over his first 6 games, and the only NFL player to have 4 150-yard games in 4 of his first 6 games to begin a career. I talk about this on the GameDay.com in my props article. Over 96.5 receiving yards at -115. Lay 2 units on it in DraftKings. Go with it. Raheem Mostert, I know Philly's got a tough run defense. Start him. I like Jalen Waddle. He's a must start. I wouldn't use Jeff Wilson if he plays in his first game back. It's still a Mostert backfield. DeAndre Swift loves the primetime lights. He's got well over 300 scrimmage yards in 2 primetime games this week. High scoring game. AJ Brown, 4 consecutive games of 125 plus receiving yards. AJ Brown's dealing with a hamstring injury, but it is a good matchup. Dallas Goedert got enough catches to where you can start him over his last few games. It's going to be a lot of offense. It's going to be the most fun Sunday night game, Mike, because some of them have been duds, but even Dallas and San Francisco was. But this is going to be a point bonanza.
And Tua, number 1 in the league at quarterback rating, 114. And this is one of the reasons why he's so successful and the Dolphins are so successful, obviously with the speed and everything. He's only been sacked 6 times. He's been staying upright. The quick passes, the speed of the team is just keeping this team alive. They've been lighting things up, and it's really been magic for Miami.
Yeah, he's just got the quickest release. Like Marino used to have a quick release, but Tua is.
I never liked lefties, though. Lefties usually don't have that quick release. It usually takes them a little longer.
Yeah,
Boomer was okay.
Yeah, Steve Young. About Tua, though, he's a system quarterback, but it's not an insult to say he is, because he's the ideal quarterback. So it's in Mike McDaniel's system. This is the best offense in 10 years. This is the best offense since the 2013 Broncos.
Moving along here, the Chiefs host the Chargers. The Chargers. I mean, we could do this show, go back 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, when Marty Schottenheimer was coaching the team. The Chargers lose another tough game.
Gentlemen.
the Chargers lose another tough game. I mean, how many tough games is this team going to lose throughout the decades here with the Chargers? We're 2-3, the Chiefs 5-1, given 5.5 points, over and under 48.
Yeah, it's well, at least the Chargers have one dedicated fan, as we've been seeing all over the internet and on memes. But I will defend that lady. People have posted that she's a fake because she's a Vikings fan. She's also a Vikings fan because she grew up in Minnesota and she roots for 2 teams. For people to say that she was a plant and everything, it's just it was totally inaccurate. You're just a very dedicated fan getting some deserved face time. I don't know that this game is going to hit the over, though, because the Chiefs' defense is even better than it's been in the last few years. People say, oh, the Chiefs don't look as good as they do. Well, they're not quite as explosive as they used to be. But, Mike, they still know how to win. And when you're 2-time Super Bowl champs, everybody plays their best game against you. So the Chiefs are not going to look as dominant as they have, but they still know how to win. And that's the difference. Now, obviously,
the Chiefs seem to play down to their level, as you saw by to the Jets a couple of weeks ago. But the Chiefs just
I don't think they play down
win.
anybody's level. I think everybody
do
brings their
to
A
win,
game.
though. I just think that they just do enough to win. They get in the comfort zone, and then when a team gets a little bit closer, they say, "Okay, we're going to turn it on now."
I don't think they do that. I think every team plays them tough, but in the end, they know how to pull it out. And, obviously Mahomes, Kelsey, must starts in fantasy. Isaiah Pacheco, top 10 fantasy running back this week. Rashee Rice is really coming on, just showing signs. They haven't had a reliable wide receiver, a fantasy wide receiver, since Tyreek Hill was traded. But Rashee Rice, I like him as an anytime touchdown scorer on DraftKings this week, and also as a fantasy sleeper, as I write about on the GameDay.com this week, because the Chargers, I believe, allow the second most fantasy points to wide receivers. Better week from Eckler. You don't bench Herbert. You don't bench Keenan Allen. Josh Palmer, maybe you stream him because 6 teams are on a bye and you need a streamer. Don't start Gerald Everett just because he caught a touchdown. Gerald Everett is not – he's a good real-life player. He's not a fantasy producer.
The Chargers, 2-3 on the season. A lot of teams in the mix in the AFC. Do you consider this a must-win for the Chargers?
I do, but, when people talk about NFL power rankings, they'll throw the Chargers in there, and like, why? They've never done anything in the playoffs. It's because they have a quarterback that a lot of people like. And I know I don't know if we're going to get to talk about the Buffalo Bills, but we talk about power rankings. Like, I'm not too impressed by how Buffalo has looked the last 2 weeks. And maybe it's time we stop calling them a contender because they've never won anything in the playoffs. And, playing against the Giants like that, after they lost to the Jaguars, I don't know if they're as good as Miami and Kansas City.
No, definitely not. Their plays lacked going back to last year. Josh Allen's been inconsistent, so I don't think their plays been up to par. But we'll get to them a little later.
Great fantasy quarterback though. Number 2 fantasy quarterback every week, 1 or 2.
You mentioned the Giants. They're taking on the Washington Commanders. Commanders given 2.5 over and under 39. Daniel Jones, if he plays, will he play? Tyrod Taylor, if Jones plays, how long will he play? You got to love the under here. The Giants cannot score points, and they're down another offensive lineman. This team's a mess. You talk about a complete teardown in New York with the Giants. I mean, they are heading in the wrong direction, and you're going on, 10 years, 2 seasons of good football here. Things are bad in Big Blue Land.
Yeah, they are. It's just, but I guess that's what the football, deities have prescribed for them, because Joe Namath made a deal with the devil, and he said, look, if you give me this one, we never let the Jets win again. And they agreed. So that's what happened with the Giants. They beat the Patriots.
Oh, come
on.
Now
they're never going to win again.
Come on.
They're jinxed for the rest of history. So
you're being a little rough here. Come on. There's more. I think the Bears are more jinxed. And what did the Bears win? They had the 85 Super Bowl, and that was it. So
yeah. Well, and some teams are just, the jinx period, like the Browns, but we won't get into that. But yeah,
what about Sam Howell? I love it, Mr. Howell. 9 touchdowns.
Nobody's going to get that Gilligan's Island reference.
Oh, yes, they will. There's a couple of people out there that don't get it. Don't kid me.
I do like Sam Howell this week. He threw 3 touchdown passes against a number 4 Atlanta defense last week. He's got 3 290-yard passing games. Over the last 4 weeks, the Giants ranked 25th in passing yards allowed to quarterbacks, 7 passing touchdowns allowed in that span. I really like Terry McLaurin this week. Curtis Samuel is somebody to watch. Brian Robinson, you can really wreck the Giants with the run. So I like Brian Robinson as a fantasy starter, and props over 61.5 rushing yards on DraftKings. I believe it's -110. So I'm definitely laying at least 1.5 units on that one. On the Giants side, as we record this, we don't know who's starting a quarterback, but Tyrod Taylor has actually looked better than Daniel Jones throwing the ball downfield against a good Buffalo defense.
You mean the Giants could have saved $40 million by just going with Tyrod Taylor? Really? Come on.
Yeah, they could have. This is why you can't always assume that the backup quarterback stinks, though. So because he didn't. And Wan'Dale Robinson starting to come back from that that knee injury. They've managed him well. He's a good fantasy streamer this week. All of his targets last week. Washington allows the most receiving yards and the most receiving touchdowns to opposing wide receivers. One thing I'm going to rant about the Giants here. They still don't get their most talented wide receiver involved. Rookie Jalen Hyatt drew scouting comparisons to Deshaun Jackson. They finally started getting him involved last week. He could be a deep sleeper for this week in a good matchup. Jalen Hyatt has so much separation gear and explosiveness that I've been stashing him patiently on every fantasy team.
Scott, they can't get him the ball with the quarterback's laying on the ground. Come on.
Tyrod Taylor was trying to get him the ball last week, and he almost did it a few times.
As
get the ball in his hands, throw him a quick out, let him do something. If you don't have time to throw, get him on a jet sweep. Get the ball in that kid's hands.
As we speak, that line has dropped from over and under 39 to 37.5. So the odds makers are looking at this as a real under here. Things not looking good for this game. So
I might take the over, though. I might take the over because Washington, I think, can score enough points to drive it.
Could this over and under could drop close to 30? What do you think?
I'm in.
Washington at 3-3. The Giants 1-5. Must win for the Giants. Although even if they win, I mean, what are they really playing for? Let's move along. Rams, Steelers. Rams 3-3. Steelers 3-2. Rams given 3 points over and under 43.5. Stafford, not big numbers so far this season.
Third in the NFL in passing yards, though. the touchdowns really aren't there. But, he's just got Cooper Kupp back. Puka Nacua has been a terrific rookie. Scott Tutu Atwell is the third, nice 3-receiver combo there. The real story is at running back, especially for fantasy players with both of their top 2 guys injured, Kyron Williams and Ronnie Rivers. 6th-round rookie Zach Evans might be the lead back, but fantasy players don't know what they'll get out of him. He's got some power. He's got some burst. I would think he gets the first crack to, show if he can succeed or fail here. I have him ranked just inside my top 20 running backs because the Steelers, you can gash them against the run. Even with a bye week, they're 25th in rushing yards allowed to opposing running backs. And obviously, Kupp is a must start. Should be a bounce back week and a good matchup for Puka Nacua. But what do you do at running back? You roll injuries and bye weeks may force you to go with Zach Evans. A lot of people are talking about Darrell Henderson, but and Myles Gaskin was also signed. Royce Freeman is there, may complement Evans this week. But a lot of people talking up Darrell Henderson. But, my thing is, if Darrell Henderson was going to be a thing, why was he on the street to begin with? Yeah, but if they cut Royce Freeman and signed him back before they went back to Darrell Henderson. So I don't see Darrell Henderson quickly leapfrogging these other 2 guys. On the other side of the ball, we might get Deontay Johnson back this week for fantasy purposes. Won't be an ideal start in the first game back. We'll cut into George Pickens's production. I would not use Najee Harris if I had to. Not in my top 30 running backs. He has one game of over 7 PPR fantasy points. Najee Harris has been terrible.
And Kenny Pickett here, to me, just over 1,000 yards in 5 games. To me, the Steelers having Pickett with the Giants having Daniel Jones. He's never going to be what you think he's going to be or hope he's going to be. Your thoughts?
Well, Pickett is from that draft class where nobody was really regarded highly. Howell is the only one who's actually shown signs of becoming something. So, Pickett hasn't done anything to impress me yet. And, that offense is that's just not a good offense. So, I'm still skeptical on Pickett. I'm not going to bury the guy yet, but he hasn't shown me anything to impress me.
Let's go to a big matchup in Baltimore where the 5-1 Lions could come to town to take on the Ravens at 4-2. The Ravens are giving 3 points to Detroit over and under 43.
Yeah, I might take the over-under's tough. I might want to stay away from this one. And, people talk about the Ravens. You even mentioned it at one point about maybe it's a Super Bowl preview, not from the Ravens side. It's like every year we hear about how the Ravens are a contender, but they've never made a deep playoff run with Lamar Jackson at quarterback. The last time they made a conference championship, Joe Flacco was quarterback. Joe Flacco, throw me a freaking bone here. Yes. But the Lions 5-1, but this would be a tough matchup for Jared Goff. And fantasy players, I don't have Jared Goff in my top 10 this week. He's better at home. 10 touchdown passes in his last 11 road games. And Baltimore has allowed an NFL low 4 touchdown passes to opposing quarterbacks. So not a great offensive matchup here. I mean, you don't bench Amon-Ra St. Brown. You don't bench Sam Laporta. Jahmyr Gibbs, if he's back, you got to use him. On the other side, Lamar Jackson, you always start him for the rushing production. This is going to be a must-watch game. 2 contending teams. It's going to be good television, good football television. Zay Flowers, decent start. Mark Andrews, you always got to start him. Fade the Baltimore running backs. All you can do there is hope that Justice Hill gets in the end zone. I don't think there's going to be a great fantasy game, and I'm not looking at it for props and bettings, but from a pure NFL fan perspective, it's something I want to see.
To me, it's a statement game for Detroit. Are we here? Have we arrived here? This is a time
Detroit made their statement in week 1. They beat Kansas
you don't
City
make
on the
you don't
road.
make a statement in week 1.
They beat Kansas City on the road.
It doesn't matter, but nobody takes to make a statement in week 1. Now we're going into week number 7. So
all right, that was a statement that you got to take us seriously. This may be a different statement, maybe to reiterate it. But when you beat Kansas City in Arrowhead, that's a statement.
All right. Someone that needs to make a statement is Bill Belichick. Getting 9 points as the
I don't
Pats
have any. I'm not talking.
as the Pats are hosting the Bills here. I mean, what a disaster. Mac Jones is what a nightmare in New England and Buffalo. This should be an easy walk for them to take this game.
This is like this is the worst team in New England in 30 years. Like we talked about, the fantasy deities and making deals. It's like, okay, give us 6 Super Bowls and
Yeah, where's Steve
we'll never be
Grogan when
good
you need
again.
him? Yeah, like it's Steve Grogan out there.
These are the worst days since like a Pat Patriot. It's when they were wearing red and playing in Foxborough. This is like the worst team since. But I will say one thing though: people are killing Belichick, saying that it was all Brady. When you have combinations like that of coach and quarterback, they can be great together, but apart, they're never going to be quite as great. Brady did win a Super Bowl with Tampa Bay because he had another good coach there, but I don't think you still take away anything for what Belichick accomplished when he had Brady. So, but that's something people are killing Belichick. But, this game, one prop I like, they wrote about on the gameday.com is for Buffalo to win both halves. Buffalo's coming off of 2 bad performances. They average.
They should have lost to the Giants. They should have lost to the Giants, and nobody loses to the Giants.
Yeah, well, if the Giants didn't blow the calls on the 1-yard line, they would have lost to the Giants. So, they played very badly. They need to get back on track. The Patriots are worse than the Giants. And I like that.
I look at Buffalo. I just think Buffalo, like you're talking about the Ravens, that they just they're there, but they're not there. And I think Buffalo's in that mix where they're just not in the elite teams in the AFC.
No, because we've been talking about what for 3-4 years now that they've been elite, and they've done nothing to confirm that. So, but they need to get back on track here, and I think it's a good game for them. My prop bet was for Buffalo to win both halves. And I believe, I can't remember what the odds were on that. I'll have to check that. But I like that bet because Buffalo averages over 14 points per game in each half, whereas New England has the lowest average point total of each half in the AFC. So, and Gabe Davis has caught a touchdown pass in 3 of his last 4 games against the Patriots. So that's something else that you have to keep in mind too. Fantasy wise, you love Allen, you love Diggs, and running back fantasy players are getting very upset because Latavius Murray was out snapping James Cook last week. But I think you still go with Cook. It's a pretty good matchup. Maybe Latavius Murray gets in the end zone if you're desperate. On the other side, I don't want anybody New England fantasy wise. Very rarely do you say a team has no useful fantasy players. For the Patriots, it does. But you know what? I don't want to hear any complaints from Patriot fans. You've seen 6 Super Bowl wins. Deal with it.
Exactly. We'll do one more, and then we'll end our podcast number 1 here. Cleveland, the Colts. Cleveland given 3 points, over and under 40.5. Now, Cleveland's one of those teams that kind of fits in that Baltimore Buffalo mode there, that they're kind of that second tier team, I think, in the AFC.
I could see that. Who thought that we would say this before the beginning of the season, Mike? Cleveland has the best defense in the NFL. People will say San Francisco, but I think Cleveland has a better secondary. They have the number 1 pass defense in the NFL.
Well, they're certainly showing it on the field. If Watson could stay healthy, I mean, this team could be a surprise here. I could see them winning a game or 2 come the postseason if Watson's healthy.
Yeah, but they're the Browns. Unfortunately, they probably won't go too deep. Yeah, but fantasy wise, we don't know if Watson's playing or not when we record this. Check out the player updates on rotoballer.com to keep up with it. Get their mobile app, gives you free updates. Alerts. Jerome Ford has been very serviceable. This is a good matchup for him, I think. And you can roll him out confidently as a fantasy running back too. Amari Cooper's been consistently putting up good numbers. Is a terrific matchup for him. David Njoku's better in real life. He's not really a fantasy tight end. Elijah Moore really hasn't shown us anything, much to the delight of Jet fans who love to see former players fail. And
well, we're just so used to failing. I mean, you know about that,
yeah.
being a Mets fan, right?
Yeah. Shot taken by the Yankee Jet fan. Okay, I get you.
I have nothing to talk about even with the Yankees. I can't rely on the Yankees anymore.
Yeah, but you can always go back to your history, I guess. But on the other side with the Colts, not a good matchup for Michael Pittman. Had his best game of the year, but he hasn't gone over 870. He hasn't hit 80 yards or caught a touchdown pass since week 1. If you have to use one of the two running backs fantasy wise, I would go with Jonathan Taylor. His snaps should continue to increase over Zach Moss, who's been very good. Cleveland defense is a good play. And, if you're struggling for a fantasy defense, the Colts might be a decent play.
Okay, Scott, we're in our final seconds here of the show here. Some final thoughts on your part.
Yeah, it's a tough week with 6 NFL teams on a bye. So you just got to go with some players that give you volume. Maybe take a deep hit on a guy like Jackson Smith-Njigba or Jalen Hyatt, if you have a gut feeling about them like I do. And, pop them in your lineup because you have to dig deep this week. And starting next week, we'll take some of your fantasy questions and answers on the podcast because, Mike, I love answering user questions and I want to make the show interactive.
You got to go with your gut. And if you have a considerate gut, you go with it.
I do.
We'll see you next week.